All right, third time's a charm. It's been a day, but hopefully you guys had a good competition today, and I'd like to go ahead and do a quick walkthrough on the mechanical. So if there were any parts that you had a question about or were unsure of or simply didn't know how to do, or if you just want to see how somebody else approaches something, here we go. So this right here obviously was what you guys just recreated, the Font Night State Battle Royale. And full disclosure, this is a complete and utter ripoff of a Fortnite, obviously, ad that I had found, which happened to be this little guy right here. And in fact, Mancake was the original inspiration for doing this. I thought he was such a ridiculously hilarious character that I was going to do a whole spoof on this thing. I was going to call it Fork Night because he's a pancake, and I realized it wasn't nearly as funny as I thought it was. But my kids love playing Undertale as well as Fortnite, and Undertale, if you're not familiar, a lot of the characters, it's an old 8-bit style game. A lot of the characters are named after fonts. The main character is Sans, and the character that we put, well, Sans is actually in your design as well, but the main character is one called Papyrus. And the boys told me that he always wanted to be in the Royal Guard, so this is our take on Papyrus. This is, once again, I had a chance to get Jason, my friend, my business partner, to illustrate something for me. Man, when somebody can draw like this, you don't turn down an opportunity to get them to draw something, because you just want to see what in the heck they come up with this time. And I am not even remotely disappointed, because he's just cool as all get out. So super lucky to have him. That is one of the best things to keep in mind as a designer, is when you have resources, use your resources. You know, you don't always have to do every single thing yourself. Can I draw? Sure. Jason's a whole lot better than I am. Why not use that resource, right? So, it's okay. Part of designers, you know, what we're doing is we're acting as art directors too, right? Where we use stock. Okay, we don't draw everything by hand. We don't take every photo ourselves. When we can, we do. But a lot of times budget, timetable, you know, whatever doesn't allow. So anyway, I digress. So this is what we're recreating. And even though this thing looks, well, you look at this thing, this is Illustrator artwork, and it is. Oddly enough, I built the original in Photoshop. And I ended up having to go back and recreate it in Illustrator because I realized it would be kind of stupid of me to do something in a program that I would totally not recommend you guys use for this style of artwork. But anyway, you gravitate towards what you're fastest in, and when I'm basically working on things, thinking things out and playing with ideas, Photoshop is what I do it in because I'm faster at it. Whereas Jason, on the other hand, is that fast in Illustrator. That's where he does his quick thinking on stuff. Anyway, let's jump over to Illustrator and we'll get going. Illustrator, new document. This thing is 9 by 6.5. It is CMYK color. Raster effects, we don't have any, but we want it up and high. We start with the print profile, and that'll get us most everything we need. I believe the directions said an 1/8" bleed, which is 0.125. And just for your mental toolbox, the reason this is such a weird size, 9 by 6.5, is that I found a good deal on printing at that particular size. And so we adjusted our artwork to fit what we had available because it fit the budget, it fit what we could get done in time, so on and so forth. And that happens a lot in the real world. You know, you work with what you've got and you make adjustments, sometimes after you're already done. But there we go. Blank document in there, and before we start actually putting anything down, I'm going to come back to this resource that you guys had, and I'm going to build my swatches in Illustrator. And I've got these written down in front of me so I don't have to switch back and forth. I'm going to come into Illustrator and I'm going to make my light green. And the important thing here is that I'm going to set these up as global swatches. Luckily, thankfully, Illustrator does this by default now. This was not always the case. Now, why does that matter? Well, for one, whenever you make a global swatch, okay, let me find there we go, there's colors. Whenever you make a global swatch, even though it's process, it treats it like a spot color, which means I can basically do tenths of it and make it like a halftone. Okay? That is super, super helpful because when I have, let's say I had a light green like that. If I tried to change it to a different color, it would overwrite that tint and it would just go to straight that color. On the other hand, let me make my second color here, 62, 0, 100. So there's my darker green. Okay. If I had a tint or a halftone, as long as I change it to another global or spot swatch, it maintains that tint, that halftone value. Okay? And that is helpful to the point where even if I'm just using black, okay, even if I am just using black, I don't just use the black swatch. I actually make it, I'll come in here to their default swatch and simply make it global. Because if I was doing something in black and white and I decided later that I did need to go ahead and add some color, either my thought on it or the client said, I don't like the gray, I need you to make it a color. Well, pretend I have not one object in this design, but I've got 15, I've got 50, and they're all different shades of gray. If I tried to channel, let's go ahead and make these all into green, if I clicked over, even though this one is a global swatch, the black wasn't. So it doesn't preserve that halftone. Okay? And that would take every single black or gray object and it would just get rid of all your halftone information and you have to do them all over again. If that was a global swatch, even if I had one that was there, one that was there, one that was full black, one that was part way down, I can grab that whole thing all at once. I can click on another global swatch and every single one of those retains its halftone value. You don't need it for this project, but I wanted to explain why it was so important to me that we do use those global swatches, because this is worth its weight in gold on every single project you do, right? The other beneficial thing, these days we are a lot more likely to be printing in process color than spot color, because when I started in design, spot color was cheaper because you'd print a 2-color job or a 3-color job. 4-color that's a lot of printing plates, a lot of setup. It was really expensive. It's flipped now. And if in designing this, all of a sudden I had to go and send this to a t-shirt company where it needed to be spot color, I don't have to go and convert all of these things. All I have to do is come down here to my swatches palette, double click that swatch, change it to spot color, and now every one of these is a spot color and a halftone. I don't have to touch my artwork. So this is infinitely more flexible, just to make sure that when you set up a new swatch, just make sure it's a global swatch. Save yourself a ton of headache. All right, that's enough of a sidetrack, right? 711510 is our cyan, or our almost cyan, right? And we have basically a rich black. It's a very, very heavy rich black. But it will be a lot darker and have some different undertones to it than just pure black ink would. Even though on screen, they might look a little bit different. And we're going to go ahead and add that one as well. And there we go. In fact, if I put that is a black swatch, that's my rich black swatch right there. So they are you are still dealing with two different colors, even if they pretty much look the same, especially in the swatches palette. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and drop our background in first. And for that, we're going to have some big solid piece, but we also happen to have this little zigzag back piece. And the problem with this is that I have no way of knowing how far this artwork extends off the screen based on what we've got. Okay, because you guys do have this piece, it's right here. I can't tell from the printed piece, so I need to figure out a different way to measure it. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this guy out of here, and that opened it up in Acrobat by accident. Okay, copy him, paste him into our document. Now he's obviously way smaller than it needs to be. Because I don't know where yet that this chops off on the edge of the page, top or bottom or even the right, there's not an easy way to measure this thing. The only place I have that I can even remotely measure it or position it is right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this point right here to put it in place. And I'm going to use the distance between this and that to figure out how big it is. Okay. Now, if you watched this the last time we did one of these tutorials, one of the ways I like to measure things out in Illustrator is just with boxes and then guides. For instance, I measured this point on the thing. Oh, I forgot to show you. Just like before, I made quick little sketches of the design so I could write all my measurements down in a way that didn't get too busy or distracting on top of a colored printout. And because this thing has enough elements on it, I broke it into two. I did one for my background elements and one for everything that goes on top of them. So that's where I'm pulling my measurements from right now, so I wouldn't be flipping back and forth and wasting your time. So anyway, I measured that bottommost point at, it's a hair under 4 inches from the left, and it's almost 2.5 inches up from the bottom. So a lot of times what I would do is I would take a box, and my actual measurements were 3.96 by 2.45. I would normally make the box. I would drag the bottom left-hand corner down to, and remember, you guys are measuring from a printed piece, which means it's been trimmed. We have a bleed. It's very important that when you're building your artwork, when you're transferring your measurements, you transfer them from the edge of the document, not from the edge of the bleed. We're going to have to go and add additional for the bleed because you weren't measuring from a bleed. So I'm going to put it down here to the bottom edge of the document, not out there. Then I would go ahead and go, okay, I can drag a guide out there. I can drag a guide out there. Now I can snap that point to the guide, get rid of everything. And yeah, you probably went, oh, well, you could have saved a step. You could have just snap that point to the box and save yourself all of that too. Well, it's still a little bit of extra time, because what you could do, another way to do it, simply take the point you're going to be measuring from, drag it to where you measured from. I measured from the bottom left-hand corner, and then hit enter. The enter key is a shortcut for move, and that point was 3.96 from the left-hand edge. And when you're moving things horizontally, positive values go to the right, negative values go to the left. Vertically, negative values go up, positive values go down. And I need to move this up by 2.45 inches, so negative 2.45. And that puts that in the exact same spot. All right? Now I will go ahead and put a guide in, because when I measured on my on the final piece from here to there, I got 0.92 inches. So I am going to go ahead and make a little, oops. Make a little box down here, snap it to the guide, snap a guide to the top. I need to make sure that this stays put and that I scale it until this point touches that guide. I'm going to go into outline mode. It's easier to see. Sometimes because of anti-aliasing, it looks like that stops earlier than it really does. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to grab my scale tool, and I'm going to click once on the point that I want to stay put. That will set my reference for scaling my fixed point there, and that's the one point that won't move. Everything else will move around it. Okay, so I clicked once. I'm going to click and start to drag diagonally, hold Shift until that touches the top guide. And then that right there is how tall the thing needs to be. We can either now go to view. Since we've only got 2 guides, we could just clear all of our guides. We could unlock them, grab them, and then delete them. What's even easier though, when you're just grabbing a couple at a time, make sure you've got your your object select arrow. Command Shift or Control Shift on a PC, double click the guide, that unlocks one, hit delete. And that way you don't have to worry about accidentally unlocking things you don't want to and forgetting they're unlocked later on. All right, so this guy right here is a gradient from dark green over to light green on the far right hand edge, and the other side of the background is pretty much the same thing. So let's take this guy, click add our default gradient, and we're going to go ahead and make it go from the dark green to the light green. And this gradient, both of these look like they pretty much follow the same angle as that diagonal right there. So we're going to go ahead and do the same thing. The way we would make it do that is to make sure that, there's my gradient tool, that the line we drag is perpendicular to that angle. So if that's the angle, perpendicular of course is 90 degrees from there. And I think that looks about right. If nothing else, it's good enough for now. We can come back and tweak it later. Okay. We need a background piece like this. I'm going to send it to back. Command Shift left bracket. And it's almost perfect the way it is. It does, however, look like the green stays solid for a bit longer on this side. So I'll probably go ahead and take that gradient tool again and start it a little bit further down and call that good. All right, that's our background. I'm going to grab both pieces. I'm going to lock them so I don't accidentally select them. Command 2, Control 2 on a PC. Okay, now the next thing we have are our big, we've got the black line, blue line, right? So let's start with our blue. Again, I'm going to go from the document bounds, not the bleeds. We'll have to scoot it out later on. And I'm not worried about where exactly those things are yet, because once again, I can either measure up from the bottom, and I've measured 4 places on here. I have measured, that work? I measured where that meets, that one, and that one. Those are the only things I need to measure to get this background in place. So my left-hand edge for the blue was at 2.0625. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take this point from wherever it happens to be, drag it all the way down to that bottom left-hand corner, and with it, I have not deselected it. If you deselect it, it's hard to grab when there's 2 points in the same spot. Leave it as is. Hit Enter. I don't want to move it horizontally, so I'm going to leave that at 0. I want to move it up, so negative 2.0625. That's where the blue needs to be. Okay. On the right-hand side, click, move it down to my bottom right-hand corner. It's 2.5. If you don't want to use move, I keep my transform palette up all the time because I use it constantly. The y-axis is up and down. And since the only thing I have selected is 1 point, I can use this y-axis to move things. I can say where it's at right now, minus 2.0625 inches. And that should, except that's not my number, I said 2.5, didn't I? And now I have to go and reselect it again. Ah, there we go. Minus 2.5. There we go. All right. So now the blue is in. All we have to do is, I'm going to go to outline mode, Command Y, Control Y, so it's easier to see. I'm going to grab that anchor point, and I'm using my direct select arrow, so I'm getting a single anchor point. And as I start to drag this out, you'll notice it says on. That means that I am still staying at the exact same angle that this line is going at. If I lose that word on, if I lose that pink highlight, or whatever your default highlight color is, then I'm changing the angle, and that means I'm changing my measurement that I just carefully did. Make sure it still says on until you hit your bleed. Drag your bottom anchor point down out to your bleed. Come over here so we're at the top right of the blue. Okay. Drag out, make sure it says on until you hit that. And down there. So there's our blue. Our next one is black. It's a little bit lower. This is one of those things, there's a million ways you can do anything. You can drag another box. For me, I'd probably take this thing, double click on my reflect tool, and just hit copy and make it black. Now I've already got them going roughly the right direction. Did it save me any time? No. But it's no harder or easier than anything else. Someone wants to laugh at you for doing it a weird way, just tell them it worked, didn't it? So I'm going to take my right-hand edge. Again, I moved these in to the document border because that's where our measurements are from. My right hand was negative 1.3125. My left was 1.75. We'll do the same thing. Grab that, make sure it stays on. And luckily, these are the only two shapes where we're going to have to mess with this because it's our only two diagonals that go off the screen. Oops. There we go. And there we go. All right. Now, the one part that I hope you weren't banging your head on the desk about is our little pattern. And I actually gave you both here because I didn't know if you were going to build it in Photoshop or Illustrator. In Illustrator, we're going to go ahead and use the PDF. I'm going to open them up, grab those, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste them over here. If you've never done it before, making a pattern in Illustrator takes almost no effort whatsoever. The one thing you can't really do is recolor a pattern once it's a pattern, or at least I don't think you can. So we're going to make it white first. Then all I have to do is take the artwork, drag it into my swatches palette, and let go. That new swatch is my pattern. Now I can delete that guy. Easiest thing on earth here, easiest way to make a pattern on top of this blue. I don't need another shape. All I need is the appearance palette. Okay, with the appearance palette, there's your stroke, there's your fill. All we have to do is come down here and we can duplicate it, or we can simply say add a new fill. Okay, flyout menu, add a new fill. We want the fill that is above the blue. Change that to our pattern. And now he's in there. Now you'll notice that he's solid white and this one is definitely not. I think I forgot to give you guys the opacity for it. Looking at this thing, I would estimate it at probably 15 to 20%, and I've slept since then, so I don't know for sure. So we'll go ahead and try 15 or 20 and see how it looks. With this still selected, on this pattern fill right here, I'm going to click opacity, and we'll try 20%. And that looks so close that no one's going to be able to tell the difference. Okay, you can always come back and change it later. Now, we have our pattern in place. What's wrong though? It's huge. I could have scaled the artwork before I made the pattern, but that's not always practical. It would have been hard to do because we had other bits. We'd measure the skull, but there'd be other bits above and below him in the pattern. Anyway, you need to know how to scale a pattern. And the way we're going to do it is with the transform palette. I mentioned I use it a lot. There's a reason. Normally, we're over here. Maybe you guys are used to doing, locking the proportions so you don't lose your aspect ratio. And maybe you're used to leaving, turning the corners or the strokes and effects off or on. But we have another option in here, and that is whether we transform just the object and leave the pattern the same size it was, transform only the pattern and leave the object the same size, or do both at once when you scale it. We want transform the pattern only. And now, and in fact there's a little thing right here that says, it reminds you that it's only going to scale the pattern. If you see that, you know you've set something whether you remember or not. How big do we want it? Well, let's look over here. What I can see is around the middle of the document. It is roughly 2 heads high with a little bit showing above and a little bit showing below. So let's come back over here, and I'm going to do it centered just to be easy. I'm going to constrain proportions because we don't want to squish our pattern. Okay, if I didn't have that, it would make our pattern look nasty. So I'm going to go ahead and constrain that. I have no sense of inches when it comes to this pattern, so I'm going to use percentages. Let's try 50%. We have one head pretty much filling the entire bit in the middle, so let's go 50% again. It looks like it might be right, but I can't tell because it's not lined up the same way as in our original. Luckily, when we're telling it we're going to transform the pattern only, transforming doesn't just mean scaling, it also means positioning. Okay, so here we have size, here we have position. I still have my same object selected. I'm just going to take the Y axis, which is up and down, and we're going to go ahead and bump this up and down a little bit until we get it about the same as that. Okay, remember, when you have a value highlighted, you can just use your up and down arrows. Okay, if you want to plug in random numbers and guess, you can, but it's a lot easier when you can see it moving. Okay, so I get that in there at a place that I think looks decent, and around the middle I can see a little sliver of the top, a little sliver of the bottom, and really I think we're probably looking good here. I think it's kind of, there we go, I like that. We'll call that good. So I would recommend putting this back to transform both, because Illustrator will remember, you will not. That's just experience talking. If you have not saved your document, it's a really good idea to do it now. I'm not going to because, hey, I'm going to live on the edge, but I don't have a competition to turn in for at the end of the, hour or whatnot. All right. It's getting a little bit late here. I'm going to add one more element, and then I'll break and I'll come back this weekend, record the second part of it, and hopefully give the whole thing to you guys on Monday. Let's go ahead and put Papyrus in there, okay? Now, the problem with this guy is that I've cut off the tip of his sword, so you can't just measure him on your document from left to right to see how big he is. And his foot's hanging off the edge, so you can't measure from top to bottom to see how big he is. So what do you do? Well, what I would do is find 2 reference points that are easy to measure from that are completely on the document. In this case, I'm going to go from the outer edge, from that tip of the sword, pike, to the outer edge of that part in the backpack. And when I measured those, I ended up with 4.37. So first, I need to get Papyrus over here. I'm going to come into Bridge, grab Papyrus, drag him in. Done. You guys are using Bridge, right? Because if you're not, why aren't you using Bridge? It's really, really, really helpful. If you're not using Bridge, then you can obviously go File, Place, go dig around all your files, finally find him here. Hope you remember what he was called because you can't see pictures of it, and then hit Place. Or you can just drag him in. It's faster, trust me. Okay, so I've got Papyrus here, and what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to make a little box. I said I've measured it 4.37 inches wide. I don't care how tall it is because I'm only looking at the width right now. I'm going to put Papyrus on top, and I'm going to zoom in where I can see. I'm going to line up the left-hand edge of that pike right there with the left-hand edge of the box. Scale tool, click on that tip to anchor that portion, and then we're simply going to hold Shift, drag up diagonally until the edge of his backpack is right on the edge of our document. And now I know that he's perfectly sized. That's all there is to it. It really is that simple. Find 2 things that are measurable, find the distance between them. I would, because we have odd shapes like this sometimes, when you pack your rulers for these competitions in the future or for nationals, if you're going to nationals, I would recommend packing an L instead of a straight ruler. That way it's a whole lot easier to know that you're measuring squarely from the edge, and you don't have things off because you had a diagonal going on. Anyway, we need to put him in there, and now one thing I should have done first off is figure out my margins. And if you look at the document, if you were measuring this thing around, you would see that the tip of that is even with the tip of that. The edge of that is even with the edge of that. This one's more visually aligned than technically aligned. And when you start measuring all these, you'll realize that you are right at, I'm doing a sloppy job here, these are 1/4 inch margins. Okay, if you measure off the printed piece, it's 1/4 inch all the way around. Okay, it's, well, there's not one on this side, but it doesn't matter because there's nothing touching that margin. So I need to add my margins in here. Because Illustrator doesn't do page layout, it has no concept of margins. So we're going to go ahead and do it the easy cheesy way. I'm going to start with something that is the exact size of my document, 9 by 6.5. You can use your transform palette if you want to. You would just make sure that you do not constrain proportions, because when you have a non-square shape, the width will change at a different rate than the height, so you have to do it twice. You would come in, you would take off from the center, you would take off 1/2 inch off the width, minus 0.5 off the height, and that is where your margins go. For pulling things in evenly, the faster way is object, path, offset path. Do a negative 0.25. Offset path always offsets a copy, so you can simply click your original shape, delete it. Now this, you can drag guides if you want to, or I'm going to take the color off of it. View, guides, make guides. Now it just turned your shape into a guide all the way around, and you've got your margins. The top edge of his axe, why was this important right now? Well, aside from the fact that setting up your margins is a fundamental part of setting up your document, but also the top of his poleaxe is right even with the margin, it's a good reference point. So line that up with our margin, we're good to go. Other than that, you could either have measured how far this part of the tank was from the right-hand edge. I happened to measure how far this tip of the axe was from the left-hand edge, and it was 4.54 inches for me. So I'm simply going to take this, I'm going to hold shift so he doesn't move up and down. Okay, that'll keep him moving in the same direction. I'm going to put that right up against the edge there, hit enter, and move him 4.54 inches to the right, not at all vertically. He is now perfectly in place, except I don't think he is. I think I plugged something in wrong because, look at him here. I can see all three of those little glass parts on the document. That is falling beyond my trim. So what did I do wrong? Did I get the size wrong? Well, looking at it, he does go from the tippy top of that to cutting off, should be the right, that's about the right amount of foot. I don't think I got the size wrong. So let me remeasure and remove him. I might have just fat fingered a number. Okay. Going by the numbers is great. Always, always step back and make sure that it looks right too. 4.54. Okay, well, when something is repeatedly not looking right, we're going to remeasure. This is 0.09 from the right-hand edge, or from the trim. There's the right-hand edge, negative 0.09. Now we can look at it and say, okay, the tip of his sword is supposed to go just a hair over, looks like right about the end of the highlight on there. Tip of his sword, right about the end of the highlight, good. Bottom of his shoe cuts off just the tip. Bottom of his shoe cuts off just the tip. His foot falls just barely below the black. Okay, that matches up. I'm only being this careful right now because something screwed up twice and I don't know where it was. And so I'm being a little extra careful so I don't mess anything up. This line goes right through his third knuckle and through his thumb. That line goes through his third knuckle and his thumb. I think he is very, very close, if not exact on here. And I think we can call him good. I am going to go ahead and me take a break. You won't notice a break. But I do want to mention one more thing before we go on. And that is, you may or may not have noticed when I'm building this, or when I'm measuring it specifically, that I did not measure how far he was from, say, like I didn't measure how far up this was from the blue. Okay, I didn't measure how far up this hose was from the black, or how far up the edge of the blue was from the top of the black here. And there's a good reason for it. When you measure relative to other elements, you run the risk of compounding errors. If I was off on just that black piece at the bottom, that means that every single thing that I measured off that black would be wrong. And on top of that, the bigger likelihood is that not only would it be wrong, unless we were absolutely perfect on every other measurement, it would be wrong plus a bit more. We would be making it even worse. And so every single thing I measure, I'm going to measure from the edge of a document, from the top edge, from the left, the bottom, the right. And that will make sure that everything is consistent and that I don't compound any errors. And even more so, if I had been measuring relative to something, it's very possible that I would end up with something where the design itself looked completely correct relative to each other, but the design as a whole was entirely wrong because every single element was off by a 1/4 inch, by an 1/8 of an inch, by 1/2 an inch, whatever. So it'd be hard to catch your mistake. When you measure from an absolute, like the edge of the document, then it can also help you catch your errors when everything else is looking good and all of a sudden something like I know what I did. I bet I pulled my skeleton out to my bleed boundary instead of the document boundary. And so he ended up being an 1/8 of an inch off whenever I moved him. No, that doesn't sound right either. Anyway, something screwed up. Even though it's probably the 4th time I've done them tonight, getting ready for this video. This time I messed up. But because I didn't just go, well, that's what the number said, I stepped back, I looked at everything, but I also was able to look at how he looked relative to everything else on the page. And when something wasn't right, I knew that it gave me a clue that an element was measured wrong, or placed wrong, or scaled wrong, something like that. And so it saved me from making, especially competition time, a costly error, right? So anyway, I'm going to take a quick break, and we'll come back to this in a bit here. But here's the cool thing. With all of my additional blabbing, okay, all that talking, all the side stories, everything else, it's been less than 45 minutes, and we have all of the hard stuff completely done. Okay, there's nothing difficult left. There's a logo, 2 lines of type, 3 little things at the bottom, and some fine print. So we've got another 15 minutes of work ahead of us, and we're done. So even with all the extra, if you just go methodically, go carefully, and kind of do things in a practiced way, take maybe some of these ideas for how to measure things and how to move things on the page quickly, and you can use your time really efficiently and get it done. Okay, so hopefully that helps out, and we'll finish this up in just a little bit here. Thanks. All right, good morning, welcome back. What do you say we finish this bad boy up here? So we've got a few elements left. We have logo, line of type, we have chunk of type, we have black box, 3 logos, and some text. So we'll do the text last because it's easy cheesy. Okay, we need a logo. So here is our Font Night logo. We're going to go ahead and open that in Illustrator. All right, it's all one color, so good. We're going to copy that in there, paste it in, make it white, and I have this thing measured at 3.9375. So I'm going to come up here to my transform palette, turn on my constrain width, and do 3.375. Boom. And then this I already measured earlier, and it snaps to the margins. There's the logo in place. We have State Battle Royale. Now, I'm going to go ahead and live dangerously here. And first of all, I'm going to get it typed in. So, and this happens to be, where's my type? Burbank. That down there. And it's white. looking at just the default, the way it came out, the way this is, I don't think there's any difference in leading, tracking, or anything. And what I can see is that this starts a little beyond the halfway point of the F. It ends almost at the edge of the T. So all I'm going to do is come in here, bring this to that. I'm going to make it a color I can actually see. And increase the size until it is probably pretty close to exact. It's white. How far down does it come? Let's see, what do we have that is equivalent? We have, okay, we're right in between the bottom part of the F and that. Yeah, I could have measured too, but I'm feeling a little bit fly by the seat of my pants this morning. So, we already had it just about right. There we go. So there, I just put a guide right in between that and that. That's easily within a 1/16 on my placement. I'm going to call that good. And I don't have to worry about necessarily centered because it's where it is. It's where it should be in there between that, and we're good. All right. Same thing over here. Take your time, measure carefully, and make nationals. I have this thing, when all said and done, it's a hair under 3 inches wide. And what I'm going to do, though, because it's easier to measure that black box. And if you look, that text is pretty much dead on the width of the black box. So I'm going to make the black box first, because that's a dead simple measurement, and then I'll go ahead and make my big text match that in size, since it's a little bit harder to measure on the text. So there's my black color. I'm going to click once so I can just enter the number by hand, and that is 2.9375 is what I measured it at, and 0.6875. And then I also measured this from the left and from the top. So I'm going to drag this guy to the top left-hand corner of the document. And he was 0.8125 from the left, and he was 3.25 down. And that looks correct. Good deal. Big text. And if I'm going too fast, well, you can't ask me to slow down because it's a recording, right? But pause button, rewind, you get it. Okay. What does it say? Take your time, measure carefully, and make nationals. So comma, comma, period. Is it all caps? It's all caps. Take your time, measure carefully, and make nationals. Period. It's obviously centered, so there's our paragraph. There's our paragraph. Center that. Come over here. We'll get those two lined up, and let's go ahead and just start bumping up our font. Actually, we don't even really need to mess with the font size. If I want to, I can just take this thing, line that up there, scale, or even honestly, our free transform tool here would work just fine as well. That period went just a hair beyond the edge when I measured. Only thing I would look at here is looking, and it looks like, so this is centered between the bottom of State Battle Royale and this. And yeah, I know you can measure it, and I would have you measure it, but I'm also trying to, as we go, teach you just a couple things to help check yourself and check and see if you do or don't need to measure something. And because that's roughly centered vertically between the two. If I put it roughly vertically centered, I see that this space is almost the same as those spaces on our leading, and it definitely doesn't look like that there. So let's go ahead and I would just take my ruler and measure maybe between the two flat tops, a Y and an E, and I've got about 0.1 inches. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to take a little box, make it a color I can get rid of easily, make it 0.1 inches, stick that down under the Y. If I'm changing the leading, the top line's not going to move. So put it under my Y, and then start shrinking my leading up until 26.5. Until I think we are close enough as doesn't matter, and we're good. And then if you really want to, I mean, this is depending on how good your eye is, this is vertically centered between the State Battle Royale and the black. I mean, or as close as doesn't make a difference. If you've got a really good eye, you're welcome to eyeball it. I'm going to measure from the E. This is my ruler, 0.343. So I can just take my E down to that black, hit enter, negative 0.343. Remember, negative moves up, positive moves down. And that should put us centered really close vertically. In fact, I think there we go. I think that looks better than my measurement did. Okay. Now finish it looks to be very, very close to the same size as that. So I'm going to go ahead and just start with that text as my starting point. Rather than grabbing the tool again, I'm going to hold Alt-Option, hold Shift, drag down. That way I'm going to, when you Option drag or Alt drag something, you're dragging a copy. Shift, make sure you drag it straight down, or it constrains your direction, right? And so this says now finish it. And is it the right size? No, because looking at this, the N is right down the center of the top stem on the D. This is right in between the A and the L. You can do this however you want to. I usually pull it up here where I can actually see what I'm doing. I said that was between the A and the L, right? There we go. And that lands really close there. And let's just take it, shift it a little bit over. And I think that is easily within a 1/16. And that, if you look at it, is just vertically centered again in there. Okay. Again, you can measure it, but honestly, with something this small, your margin for error on your ruler may be enough that if you go strictly by the numbers, you may end up being more off than you would eyeballing it. Again, if you trust your eye on centering things. All right. Last couple of things here. We have 3 logos. Let's go ahead and grab that, and we're simply going to open them all up at once in Illustrator. Our spoof on the PS4, obviously. So we'll grab that one, copy, go away text. We'll drop that in there. We know it needs to be white. Come to Bitstorm. Okay, that does not look like my black and white logo. First thing I'm going to check is layers, because whenever I prepare logos for clients, what I tend to do is, aside from giving them the individual pieces, I will also give one file that has all of the color versions in layers, because whenever I place a document like this in InDesign, I can control the layers of a Photoshop document, of a PDF, of an Illustrator file from within Illustrator, which means I can take a logo that I'm going to be using throughout a publication, drop one single file in there, one link, and each instance of it I can simply right-click and edit layers, and I can turn layers off and on, and I can use every single color version of the logo by only placing one file. And it is an enormous time saver. And it means that if you ever have to change your logo file, you change one file, you don't have to go change 5 versions and then update links. So there's our white version. Copy. Bitstorm's in there. And finally, Bean logo. Those things are grouped right now, so let's give it a quick ungroup. Control-Shift-G, Command-Shift-G. Grab that. Those are still grouped, so copy, close window, paste it in there, and it's white. All right. Pull those off to the side. I measured Bitstorm Games at 1.5 inches wide. I'll position them in a second. BS4, I measured at 1.5 inches wide. It goes over there. This one I measured at, now this one I would have been smarter to measure vertically because I've got a more definite top and bottom point. I'm not always smart when I'm going fast, and so I did measure it horizontally, and I got 0.5625. And there's that guy in there. Okay, now we know, looking at this, that left to right, this second tip of the second wing is even with our margin. And I measured earlier, and from the bottom of the A, because this is probably the easiest place to measure from, to the bottom of our document, is 0.8125. So, A down to the bottom of our document, not our bleed. Move it negative 0.8125. And then we'll take that wingtip right there, holding shift so it doesn't move up and down. Snap it there. That guy's in place. This guy, if we were to measure across, just hold our ruler up there, he is pretty well on the exact same thing, on the exact same line, so that is way less than a 1/16 if it's off at all. It may be that he's actually vertically centered between two things. But my smart guides are trying to be a little overly helpful. That's probably what he is exactly centered between those two. Yes, I could measure. I should measure. I didn't measure. But I'm confident in what I'm seeing. Measuring between these two, 0.357, 0.35. So this is centered between the two, roughly. And most likely it is centered with that. Move it to the right, 0.357. .35. And if anything looks off at all, I think we're pretty close to dead on. We've got one element left, and that is a big old chunk of text. Now, it's not in my images folder, but if I look at my mechanical text, we do have this. So we're going to copy it, come in here, type tool, paste. Now, that's a big old hunky chunky of text. Luckily, this does tell us that this is simply 6-point Arial regular. So, Arial regular 6, and let's go ahead and start off. If I'm recreating somebody else's work, my starting assumption, this is horrible, my starting assumption is that they were lazy. And so always try the default settings first. And 7 times out of 10, maybe 8, they'll be right. It'll save you some time from having to measure every single little thing. If you can just try it once at the default, measure it, and if it's right, you're good, you can move on. This also works with, hey, what font is that? Well, if you know they come from a PC, try Times New Roman and Arial. And if it's not Arial, try something like Calibri, because that's the default font in PowerPoint. Start learning those weird little default fonts for things that you know clients use a lot, and a lot of times you will be able to find your font. Yeah, there's tons of tools to help you identify fonts. It's faster if you just check it, and yeah. All right. I digress. Let's go ahead and do left justification here. Boom, 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 boom. And where are our breaks? Okay, so does need to be all caps. So before we do that, well, okay, it breaks at the word to, at the word cool. This is not enough text for me to even bother making a text box, especially in Illustrator where text boxes aren't nearly as handy as they are in InDesign. So I'm just going to put in a hard return there, hard return there. Make doubly sure that I don't have any paragraph before or after spacing to screw things up. So there's that. I'm going to take the entire thing, type, change case, uppercase. Now this entire chunk of type, I just measured it from left to right, top to bottom. I got 5.24 by 0.322. Drop that on there, make it a weird color that you can see, put it back behind the text. Text is lined up with that boundary. All right, so left to right, that's dead on. So my font size is correct, but we were given the font size, so that's not really surprising, right? All we have to do is tweak our leading. Let's try 9.7. Darn it. 9.5. And that is, I think, as close as we're going to get. Delete our red box. And just because, never ever trust what somebody sends you. Okay? They may tell you it's completely right. Proofread it anyway. So, copyright 2021, all rights reserved. The Font Night logo is IOUSLY, a total rip-off of Fortnite. We're just curious we don't have to worry about capitalization since it's all caps, to see if you caught the Undertale references as well. I mean, seriously, has Papyrus ever looked so cool? No, he hasn't, because they didn't have Jason. Anyway, don't steal things. Luckily, this is considered an SIDERED parody, and therefore protected under copyright law. Good deal. And we are boom, boom. We're now done. Let's go ahead and save this thing. Oops. And let's see how well we did. The way these are actually being judged is that we have a key that I make for the mechanicals. It looks like this. And we drop it on top of it and see how well everything lines up. So let's go ahead and drag this in here and see how well we did recreating. Okay. That should match up with our blades. Oh, at some point I must have let my font might get bumped over, and I didn't realize it, because yeah, I completely goofed. Look at that. Somehow I let that get bumped over because I got overzealous and did not check myself before I went and saved and said I'm done. So I'm going to grab those two things together, drag that over. Now obviously you guys don't get a chance to correct yourself, but we're going to correct this to help give you guys some ideas of what to go back and double check on before you turn things in, especially if you've got a few seconds extra time. Now, the rest of this, Papyrus is dead on, or real close. That's within a point. So that's great. Our zigzag, look at that. That came out great. Our papyrus heads, that's within a pixel. I forgot my contestant number. I was thinking I'm not competing, I'm not a contestant, but it was in the instructions. So I just missed points on this thing, and if I got it perfect and you got it perfect, and the difference is that you put your contestant number on there, I just cost myself a win. All right? We have everything. Now this down here, remember I eyeballed my text instead of measuring it perfectly. I'm probably more off on this than I am on any other element because I got a little cocky and decided that I can just do that by eye. Now, am I unhappy with how close I got it? In this case, not really. I traded a teeny bit of accuracy that I was pretty darn sure was not good, because looking at the judging rubric, I know exactly how far off I can be and still get a score of perfect. And so if I'm confident that I'm within an 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch or whatnot, then I'm okay with it. And in this case, I was confident enough, and if I'm not going to measure it exactly, but you know, time would tell if I'm right. This one, I also, remember, I eyeballed my up and down, my vertical, on this one as well. And that also was off a teeny bit. So, all in all, it looks like it's possible that my leading was still off by a hair, or my font size was off by, actually it looks like the font size was off by just a hair. That is within a 1/0 margin of error. That is pretty close to perfect. Now this one I should not have eyeballed the distance. No, that one I measured. That one I just got off of my measurement a little bit. That's still within, let's see, how wide is that? 0.02. And a 1/16 is 0.0625. So this is less than a 1/16 off. So we're still in the perfect territory as far as scoring goes. Now, I remember this. In the real deal, this is in fact out. The real one is in fact past the margin because I did not catch it before I sent it to press. I remembered that afterwards. It should have been dead on with that, and I went and made that assumption because I forgot that I screwed up when I made the original. And so, yeah, so I ended up being off by a hair on this, at least in the placement of it. And I don't think, now we always measure from the biggest mistake, and so the biggest place where it's off is from there to there, and that is also 0.02, so that is less than a 16th off, and so you would still, even if you put it directly on a margin, get perfect marks on that. So the only points out of this entire thing that I would have actually lost in this recreation is because I was rushing and I forgot my contestant number. I did not go back and check all those boxes to make sure that I had every single piece on here. That is a stupid mistake, and I would be very temporarily mad at myself if it cost me a win, but I would also look at it as a major learning thing, and it would be one of those things where I would never ever forget something like that ever again in my life, because it cost me. So that is our recreation. That's my approach to doing a mechanical, and hopefully, oh, just real quick, mechanicals in general, as much as they seem like, oh, they're just making us do all this little refined fiddly work to see if we know the software, that's not entirely true. A lot of times when we're doing client work, they will pull this old beat up, tore up brochure out of some ratty old file cabinet and say, this is the last brochure that we have. It was done in like 1997, and we're happy with it. And you're shaking your head in your mind going, oh, please don't be happy with it if it was done in 97. Anyway, we're happy with it, but we need to update a bit of text on here. And so, but we obviously don't have a file for this thing. This is the only thing we have. We have this one reference. But to help out, we went ahead and wrote on top of it to show you all the changes we need. Because writing all over the thing you're supposed to recreate, why do you think I make my little sketches? Because it makes it hard to recreate it accurately when you've written all over it. Anyway, so what do you end up doing? You have to mechanically recreate their thing exactly and then go back and make the changes. And so a mechanical is actually pretty real world. I have to do it several times a year. It's not like, oh, you'll do it once in your lifetime and that's it. It depends on the types of clients you have. Every single client's different. But it's absolutely not an unrealistic challenge in the slightest. It is a good test of technical skills too. It's a great test of your software skills and just to show that you've got fit and polish, because creative, okay, the quality of your ideas is all well and good, but if you can't execute them cleanly, it doesn't do anybody any good either, right? You have to be able to both have those ideas and put them together cleanly in a polished fashion, and that right there is a big difference between a professional designer and amateur hour. So that's the other thing this mechanical is really doing for you, is it's making sure that it's reinforcing that fit and finish, that polish, and making sure that things are exact. And that'll serve you well. So hopefully this helped. Good luck with it, and I hope you have fun with it. Take care.